Hola, buenas tardes, bienvenidos acá a la Facultad de Comunicaciones de la Universidad Católica y vamos a dar inicio a el coloquio doctoral de hoy a cargo del profesor Josh Spange. Él es académico de la Universidad de Londres y anteriormente también estuvo en la Universidad de Ámsterdam, que es donde nos conocimos. Y voy a hacer una muy breve presentación del profesor y luego voy a darle el paso y ahí nos vamos a cambiar al inglés porque la presentación va a ser en inglés. El profesor Van Spange tiene una carrera bastante dilatada en dos grandes áreas, una es las ciencias políticas y la otra el área de comunicaciones. Y por supuesto su tema de investigación es la comunicación política, que es un tema que acá en la Facultad de Comunicaciones y en la universidad en general nos importa bastante. Tenemos muchas investigaciones en esa área y particularmente en el día de hoy el profesor Van Spange lo que va a hacer es presentar parte de un gran proyecto que él está trabajando actualmente con colegas en Europa, un proyecto de varios años plazo, donde el concepto clave es precisamente la demonización de la política, que es justo el tema que va a estar introduciendo en esta investigación. Así que nada, muy bienvenidos a todos quienes nos siguen desde el lado de la pantalla y quienes están acá presentes. Y la idea sería que el profesor Van Spange, después de presentar, hay un espacio para preguntas y respuestas. Si alguien prefiere hacer la pregunta en español, yo también puedo traducirla para que podamos hacerlo, cosa que el idioma no sea un obstáculo para poder sacarle el mejor partido a esta charla. And now I'm going to switch to English. So basically I was saying you are almost close to get the Nobel Award. In short, no, on a more serious note, we're very thankful for your visit, Just, and here in the school, and I hope it's not going to be the last visit we're going to have, and eventually we might develop into a more fruitful collaboration. So with no further ado, please go ahead, and some people are online, they're going to be following you, and I said that at the end of the talk, when we have the Q&A session, if there's someone asking in Spanish, I can do a translate, and so that we can have a fruitful question. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks, Sebastián, and thanks to the university, thanks to the Facultad de Comunicaciones for having me. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today. And what I would like to do today is basically to present something that is kind of new within the framework of a larger project. So I'm going to try to sketch out some research agenda, to maybe have a little bit more of an open session, but of course first after introducing the main concepts here. So you're actually very welcome to for any input. Really, it's really at this stage still very open. This part of the research. So I'm very happy for any comments, suggestions, criticisms. Now would be the time, and this is also the very first time that I present this. So this, you're the first to hear about this. Of course, it is building on some of the prior work. Now, what is this about? This is really about demonization of political actors, and perhaps I should introduce the topic a little bit first, and have some definitions and some examples. And for one example, for introduction, I would like to take you to The Hague in the Netherlands, not to the International Criminal Court today, but to the Dutch Senate in The Hague, and to 20 September 1966. Okay, so this is a picture of taken that day, 1966, and one senator was sworn in that day. His name was Hendrik Adams. And to the right, there was his fellow senator, Jan Baas. And Jan Baas stepped up to the microphone and called Hendrik Adams out as a pro-Nazi and an anti-Semite, who actually threatened Jan Baas with deportation 22 years ago. So Jan Baas had joined the resistance during the occupation by Nazi Germany of the country, center-right resistance. And Hendrik Adams was actually collaborating with the Germans and also writing for an anti-Semitic newspaper. And so Jan Baas actually publicly called him out for that. Now, after that, Hendrik Adams physically attacked Jan Baas on the Senate floor in the coffee corner. And then after which Jan Baas actually punched him in the face. So Jan Baas was actually also not only a former resistance fighter, but also an amateur boxer. So here we see actually Hendrik Adams trying to cover his face because he had a black eye after this moment. But what I want to where I want to go with this example is that this falls under the rubric, like many examples and anecdotes, but of demonization of a political actor, right? So systematically portraying the actor as pure evil, right? And pure evil can mean all kinds of things in different contexts, right? So in some contexts, it might actually be the United States that are pure evil, or Iran, or the Soviet Union, or the Ancien Regime in France in the 18th century. But in the context of the Netherlands in 1966, and I would argue still, the worst of the worst is Nazism, right? So you can, political actors might call themselves far left or far right, but no one in their right mind would call themselves a Nazi, all right? Now, this is Sjoerdje van Heerden, a colleague at the University of Amsterdam, who wrote a PhD dissertation about demonization of political actors. And the definition that I mentioned was actually hers. And she not only conceptualized, but also operationalized, mapped the concept, at least in the context of the Netherlands, 1995, 2011, and also looked at some effects of demonization on public trusts, but also on, for example, the electoral support for the demonized party. Because the story continues with Hendrik Adams and Jan Baas. Hendrik Adams denied all accusations, although he was actually convicted in 1946 for his role during the Second World War, and accused his fellow senators and other politicians of conspiring against him. And the party leader, the leader of his party, the Farmers' Party, actually stood beside him for all this time, and also beside others who had collaborated with Nazi Germany more than 20 years ago, before that. Which led to a party split over this issue, and it dominated the public and media agenda for months, actually. So demonization can actually have all kinds of consequences in terms of media, in terms of political parties, in terms of the public, and yeah, that is also what I think would be good to study, to take from here. And of course, many of you might be thinking right now, well, Joost, this we already have a concept for this, right? There's this broader concept in sociology, in psychology, right? The concept of stigma. And if you read the classic by Irving Goffman, 1963, which is recommended, by the way, it's really a very compelling book. He talks about not only stigma related to physical deformations. The book opens with a very tragic story of a young girl who was born without a nose. But also, for example, mental health issues, and also issues related to, or stigma related to, for example, ideology or extremism. So yes, this is related to stigma, certainly. And in prior work, I also related this effects on voting behavior also to stigma. We will get to that as seen as elements of labeling and stereotyping, separation, status loss, and discrimination in a power structure that allows it. So, for example, the labeling as the embodiment of pure evil, of absolute evil in a particular context. Stereotyping, right? There's the Nazis again. Separation of the viable options of this particular political actors of other ones. Discrimination against them, in the sense that voters would really not see it as a viable alternative, and also basically in this power situation. So, but then it might also not be the same. In our dissertation, Sjoerdje van Heerde also refers to that and makes an argument saying, well, actually, this is not just stigmatization. It's not just, in the words of Goffman, the reducing of a normal person or normal entity to a discounted or tainted one. No, this is much more particular. This is really the personification of the devil themselves, right? This is really a very specific type of stigma and of stigmatization. And that implies, it has very important implications, she argues. It implies not just that you shun the person, right, because they're ill or something. No, you actually want to eliminate them, and it normalizes, it legitimizes also violence against a person or a party or any other entity. So in that sense, it is more of a zeroing in on a very extreme form of stigma, and also a very extreme form of negative campaigning, if you like. Right? There's all kinds of concepts that might be linked to here, and well, that's also where I would like to pick your brain here to see like what resonates, what you think is worth like digging into more. And also how, of course. I myself did some work on cordons sanitaires and on hate speech trials, for example, which also might be incriminating. Yeah, there's all kinds of ways that this research might actually take from here, right? That's also, well, why I would be interested to hear your thoughts on that. Now, the first thing that would come to mind is first, does it actually occur, right? So map the occurrence of demonization in this sense. There's very little about it, a bit in the Netherlands, a bit in other countries as well. And whereas Van Heerde actually sees a lot of stigmatization or demonization by a lot of political actors in the Netherlands, Schreuder and Fernandez Garcia actually do not see that, and mainly they don't use weeklies and newspapers. They actually focus on Twitter in election campaigns, and they actually see it's mainly the center-left that demonizes particular parties on the right. But not in all countries. Actually, in some countries they don't. So a very mixed picture here. I did myself together with Rashid. Here is Rashid. We undertook also a mapping exercise, which was more in the context of new political parties, but still we looked at stigmatization, on criminalization, building 2 data sets, and we also saw very low levels of some demonization, quite consistently actually, but at the same time some far-right parties were actually very, very heavily targeted. Which might make sense and which is perhaps not even enough for these. I mean, perhaps it's just calling a spade, as we would say. But on the other hand, it's also a very interesting finding that, for example, the far left is not targeted here in this way. Now, and then we also did some, so Rashid and I also did some work on electoral support. We were quite triggered by that as well. An experiment, a series of experiments and non-experimental research. I don't know, how am I doing on time, Sebastian? Is it? Yeah, okay. So this is an experiment that we carried out that actually, especially my former PhD student, Lisanne Wiggers, and also a former postdoc, Laura Jacobs, on this project. It was a team of 6, carefully crafted. Lisanne actually got a postdoc at Stanford, and Laura went on to receive her own prestigious research grants. But what we did in this experiment was we had a newscast. So the NOS, which is the BBC of the Netherlands, right? It's the public broadcaster. NOS in 60 seconds they had online, but also on television actually. The concept is quite simple. It's 4 items and the weather. In 60 seconds, you know what is happening in the world. And we manipulated one of these items in all kinds of versions, and then we confronted citizens with these versions. It's actually a representative sample of the Dutch citizenry. And we had several options, as you may guess, some that involved some stigmatization and others not. And then we measured their response. And then we actually found that this actually had an effect, a negative effect, just as Sjoerdje van Heerde found at the aggregate level. Van Heerde actually found this on public opinion polls, together with her supervisor, Wouter van der Brug, University of Amsterdam. Now, we thought, well, that's interesting. We also did this actually before that. We did this in a non-experimental setting, a paper that's called Tainted Love, and we actually had a 4-wave panel survey, representative sample as well, and then 9 outlets. And the whole idea you can see here, the same as in the experiment. And also here we found effects. So exposure to stigmatization actually led to lower perceived legitimacy of the party, in this case PVV, a different party than what you saw just yet, led to a lower vote propensity for the PVV. So at the individual level, moderated by anti-immigrant attitude. So it's not green voters or social liberal voters. They probably, they will not vote for this party anyway. But it's those who tend to agree with the party. Among those, we actually see that, a lower perceived legitimacy, and as a result, lower propensity to vote for this party. We made use of a quasi-experimental setting in which the PVV that shunned all kinds of other parties, Front National, for example, in France, FPÖ in Austria, Vlaams Belang in Flanders, until a point where they suddenly shifted and suddenly became very close with them and wanted to cooperate with them And then, as a result, they got all kinds of extra stigmatization, the PVV, because they were seen as just as extreme right as the Front National, for example. That was in 2014. You may wonder, why would the PVV suddenly shift? I mean, they even, in 2009, they even asked for different seats in the European Parliament because they didn't want to seat next to the Front National of Jean-Marie Le Pen at the time. And then in 2014, they completely shifted. And they really, Geert Wilders, made a lot of advances to Marine Le Pen, and they got on very well. There was a very simple reason for that. 17 million euros of subsidies from the European Union when they managed to get a section in Parliament. So anyway, so we used that shift, and also this shift in media coverage. The intuition behind this might have something to do with that voters. Many voters are of, as our colleagues here put it, might be of two minds about immigration and also about these parties. On the one hand, a lot of voters actually harbor a lot of negative stereotypes, and actually a lot of them think multiculturalism is a failure, want to close the border, and so on. But at the same time, they don't want to vote for parties that are beyond the pale, right? They don't want to vote for racist parties, for Nazis, so there is actually quite some vulnerability of these parties to stigmatization or actually demonization in particular. So I get to the point where it becomes more open there, because this is where we are. The mapping action studies, well, the mapping is quite limited, mainly in the Netherlands, also some other countries, but the causes are underexplored, and even about the consequences, where we did some work, Van Heerde and Van den Brug, but also Rashid and myself. It's still theoretically underdeveloped. Empirically, it's very, very limited, actually. And there are still all kinds of questions open here, right? So especially if you look into media coverage, who demonizes might be crucial. It might be journalists themselves. It might actually be political actors or other actors, for that matter, who is demonized. If you talk about a party, it's of course not one entity, but there's all kinds of parts. There might be members, there might be activists. There's some research about this as well, but it still scratches the surface, I would say. And it's also interesting that there's different types of demonization that might actually target different types of parties. And especially when you get to the center, that might also be a little bit newer or more recent. You also get into all kinds of more like conspiracy theory type of reproaches, I would say, right? You would say, well, centrist parties be hard to demonize. Well, if you look at social media, actually quite a few centrist parties in Western Europe, I don't know about Chile, but they are quite demonized in very particular forms. And then, of course, we have potential causes as well, right? There's also quite a fruitful distinction, perhaps, between motives in terms of very genuine motives of expressing a belief or expressing disgust about a particular person, right? That might very well have played a role by Jan Baas, the resistance, the senator that was in the resistance, who saw actually this despicable person being sworn in as a fellow senator, and also some of his party members. But it might also, of course, be something about gaining an advantage, right? And then there's all kinds of potential effects. We looked at voting behavior, but there might be all kinds of other things as well. So yeah, it would be very interesting to hear what sticks with you, what you would what avenues you would like to see discovered, or what other things you might see, or any ideas about how to best really get at this. Of course, I mean, causal inference is really a big problem here. Often, and then of course you can do experiments, but then you get into all kinds of other pros and cons. Also, of course, bring in the media here, right? So media trust, for example, but also media sources. What I have not discussed until now is counter strategies, and perhaps I would like to end my a little bit exploratory, a bit digressing presentation here today with some hypotheses, but especially about counter strategies, because these demonized persons are, of course, no passive actors here either, right? Hendrik Adams actually denied accusations and really accused the other politicians, as I mentioned. And there might also be interactions with other responses. I will get to other responses as well. But hypotheses might include, for example, that it might be conducive to a spiral of silence, right, which might be very difficult to break. Denial might actually backfire. I'm sure you're all aware of Richard Nixon going on television saying, "I'm not a crook," which left probably millions of Americans wondering whether he actually is a crook. You actually might actually have the same with Hendrik Adams, right? I mean, his denial might actually have might have backfired here as well, might have experienced some backlash, because people might have it might have led people to think more in terms of the Second World War and what had happened then, as opposed to other issues of the day. And what maybe a bit cynical, maybe a bit like exploratory, but what might help, if you think about it, is might actually diverting the attention in a very strong way. For example, what might have helped Hendrik Adams or others really putting a lot of emphasis on that he was threatened and that he was physically, well, actually he started, but still, that he was physically attacked and etc. And a lot of politicians nowadays are, of course, threatened. So it is quite a credible claim, perhaps more than in the Netherlands of 1966. That might, of course, through empathy, through all kinds of ways, also simply diverting the attention might actually work a lot. In my experience, a lot of, well, not my, in the sense of following the news, a lot of claims of being threatened are accompanied by very few questions by journalists, for example, who perhaps should know better, you know, who perhaps might ask some questions, but it's also very tricky, right? I mean, do you want to ask questions to someone who claims to have received death threats? Or so in that sense, anyway, this is maybe a bit too cynical for today. But anyway, in any case, there might be all kinds of counter strategies, but a politician should be very, very strong and have a very, very cunning plan, probably, especially if he is someone like Hendrik Adams. Now, finally, zooming out. Just a few last slides. This falls into the overarching theme of elite reactions to political challengers, the research theme that I got funding for. So I gratefully acknowledge funding from the Dutch Science Foundation, also for legal reactions that I looked at and political reactions. Political reactions, media reactions was actually a team in Amsterdam and political reactions. I wrote a book about it. It was I started in Florence at the European University Institute when I did my PhD. Unfortunately, the book didn't exactly become a bestseller. There's, on the face of this, there's only one person I know who actually bought a book, which is my mother. Not sure she read it, but so there are still copies left if you're interested. And for the legal actions, Rashid, who you met before in this presentation, and I just finished a book here as well on legal reactions. It's now under review for publication with Oxford University Press. And our goal is to actually double the sales, right? Because we both have a mother, so it should be possible. We also got funding, or I also got funding from Brussels, ERC Consolidated Grant, and that takes me back to these media reactions in which this stigmatization or demonization, rather, might be also an important and interesting sub-project. Here is the team. We're 10 of us right now, yeah, we would be very interested to hear your thoughts on this. And I will be here for next week as well. So do reach out if you want to have a chat, want to have a coffee. Just let me know, and thank you.
Thanks, Jost, for your presentation. And now comes the time of the Q&A. In the meantime, I was checking our YouTube channel, and at some point there were 7 people watching. So, yeah, maybe it was your mom.
Probably.
Yeah. The nice thing is that we're gonna leave these recorded, so then you can show people everywhere, and we can, review some. But I do have questions, but I just want to leave questions if you want to. And
compatible moderator or mediator, maybe if you could expand on that. It has more to do with the kind of like the current climate. There's been a lot of talk about populism and how populism, one of their strategies is this whole us versus them. Mm-hmm. And demonization and stigma works very well along those lines. So I'm wondering whether you have any ideas or insights about how demonization might work specifically within populist movements or politicians.
Yeah, great questions, Ingrid, and nice meeting you. And of course, I know your work as well. It's really great. 2 questions, so let me take them in reverse order. So the populism, there's all kinds of ways that you can call these parties, right? So populism, of course, goes beyond only radical right or only far right or only anti-immigration parties. It also includes far left, for example, also here in South America. So in that sense, it's kind of a broader theme than I claim to have expertise in. What we focused on is on just a few anti-immigration parties, and I've also worked on these parties. And so what you see there is really that a lot of voters might be scared away from these parties as soon as they might sense that there's something really fishy about these parties, that they have a dubious past, that they actually harbor extremism or extremist persons, for example. So in that sense, it is certainly a vulnerability, I would say, that is also slightly research, perhaps, and where the demonization angle might also work quite well. Rashid and I were really surprised, to be honest, really pleasantly surprised. 9 out of 10 times, or even more, we are unpleasantly surprised by the lack of findings, where we really thought we're going to find something here. No. With the stigmatization, it's actually the other way about. So it's actually, so we found this in experiments, we found this in non-experimental research, moderated, mediated effects. And there might be something really, really, really strong here. So in that sense, I think I do not have very clear answers about populism as a whole, but especially some parties might be very susceptible to losing a lot. And that's also why you, of course, see a lot of parties on the right really trying to kick all kinds of people out, right? Unlike the Farmers' Party, who was actually keeping all these Nazi collaborators in. So in that sense, it is, I think, promising, but I don't have clearer answers. About gender, I really like a research line that is, for example, done by Elisabeth Iversvlaten. You already saw her in the presentation as well. Elke Harteveld at the University of Amsterdam, and some others. Van den Brug, you also saw him in the presentation, about that women tend to be more susceptible to social cues, right? And also to harmony, and whereas men might be a little bit more like, I don't know, well, less susceptible, let's put it that way. And that might actually have all kinds of repercussions for how they react to perceived stigma. So there's actually quite, there's a few studies by Harteveld, Elke Harteveld et al., suggesting that gender might actually play quite a role, because once stigmas are removed, female voters are much more, or seem to be much more likely to vote in alignment with their immigration stances, for example, right? Whereas if there's a strong stigma, then it's mainly men who actually vote for anti-immigration parties. So in that sense, there might be all kinds of things going on, and we can actually take that much more general, right? It's a much more general argument about demonization and how people actually react to that. So my bet would be that there's all kinds of effects, gendered effects actually here, and that demonization might work for particular types of persons much more than for female voters, perhaps also for higher educated voters, much more than for I don't know, for lower educated male voters, for example. But I do, I would be very interested to hear your thoughts here as well. Yeah.
Hi, Constanza Mujica. I'm a academic here, associate professor. Something that it may be not in the direct scope of what you presented, but I find like interesting, is trying to find out what is considered demonic. I mean, what are people or political actors, parties demonized about? The Nazi thing, that's clear. The communist label also is frequently used, but I think it's interesting because it could express some sort of cultural consensus about what's evil or not, even because even if it's not a total consensus, but there for demonization to be effective, it should be some sort of agreement among at least a group of people that that is actually the incarnation of all evil. It wouldn't work to say that all people who like chocolate ice cream are the incarnation of all evil, because there's no consensus about that. So I think that's something that I would find compelling. And the other thing is, I'm not on the list of people or institutions that are demonized. I don't remember if I saw the political system in general as something that could be demonized. Democracy, or for example, Congress. I'm thinking about the kinds of studies we did about political trust in Congress or in the police. So when thank you. If institutions can be demonized, and what the effects for the political system, disposition not only to vote for them, but to vote anyway, or to comply, for example, with certain rules, that I would find that sort of interesting or compelling to talk about.
Yeah.
I'm going to follow up on that because, I mean, I hadn't thought about it, but it's very interesting when you think about this whole idea, for example, how people are disappointed in democracy or certain aspects of it. And I think that has to do with populism as well, but that whole idea that the system is rigged or it doesn't work for everybody, and that's actually quite interesting. And yeah, I don't have an answer for that, but that I think is fascinating. And I was also remembering when you talk about who gets to be demonized. I remember when you started your presentation, the whole axis of evil that Bush used to refer to that whole thing. But I remember that back then we used to laugh about the whole idea of an axis of evil. I mean, who fights evilness or something like that? But apparently it is, I mean, it worked. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, great. Very thought-provoking. I also had not thought of that there's actually all kinds of aspects of the entire system, or the entire political system, or can actually be demonized in that sense, leading to abstention. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a very cool idea. I realize, of course, that some elements like the system is rigged, for example, is falls short of demonization, perhaps. But right, if Bernie Sanders says that, for example, about the United States and their political economic system, I would say demonization would be a far cry, but I yeah. Oh yeah, definitely, yeah. It's also because this was absent in the 1960s in Western Europe, for example, whereas now you can much more see it. So in that sense, it might be added a climate, as you mentioned, might actually be conducive to such escalation, yeah. And then, of course, demonization is context specific, right? Already, Sjoerdje van Heerden makes that point, but I would absolutely go beyond that and say that among particular groups, there might actually be a very convincing demonization possible, or it can also be created, of course, by politicians, right, to some extent. But I mean, it has to fall on fertile ground. So, but it might certainly be context-specific. When I was so I lived in Italy during my PhD dissertation, and then Berlusconi was still prime minister. And every election campaign, he started again about communists boiling children in China, and and among certain groups, perhaps, this is really like the evilness that this really triggers something, right? I mean, of course, it's exaggerated, but then still, so it always made me wonder to what extent this was really like demonization that actually worked, or whether it was just a gesture or just a, I don't know, just a oratory trick or something. But these are. It's very interesting that that we as academics might also not see particular things as potentially demonized, right? I mean, in that sense, there might also be other things going on. So also, for example, because we also should not forget that a lot of large segments of the populations actually believe in the devil, if you ask them, for example, in hell, right? And in so in that sense, it is perfectly possible that this actually is much more powerful among particular groups in society, which might be bigger in some countries. For example, in the United States, bigger than in Western Europe, for example. It might be declining, but still, yeah, it's very interesting to go beyond that context and see to what extent there is some kind of consensus, if you can, or fabricated consensus, or that you can think of in terms of demonization. Yeah. No, great. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that. And then, yeah, the axis of evil that Ingrid, that you mentioned. That, so Ronald Reagan, for example, referred to the Soviet Union also as the evil empire, right? And then I also wondered a lot, like to what extent this really stuck, and with which voters. But it is certainly possible that a lot of voters actually saw that as also the anti-religious communist empire, right? So in that sense, yeah, I don't know. It's and now with these conspiracies that I mentioned, that you also allude to, there might actually be quite something going on. Also, some people on Twitter, or X, that I have to say now, seem to be really into some kind of rabbit hole of the WEF and Klaus Schwab, and that is really for them, and central bank digital currencies and all kinds of, it seems to be for them really like the devil in persona almost, if you read some of these tweets or X's or whatever they're called. Yeah, okay.
So I'm going to try to frame this the best I can. As a comparatist, I always start my thinking on these categories of demonization, and so by trying to put them on a spectrum, right? So, and you gave this example of people who do not like, who may not feel so welcoming to immigration, right? Like mass immigration, for example, but they don't want to vote for parties that are, quote unquote, stigmatized or demonized as racist, right? But I'm wondering if those parties are being demonized, or are they recipients of reductionist critique, which I think is different, or are they being addressed with hostility, which I think is also different than demonization. And I'm coming at the spectrum of demonization versus hostility and maybe reductionist critique in the middle, because you started with this case of the politician that got punched for being a Nazi, right?
Yeah.
I would call that hostility, but calling it by what it is not demonization. You know what I mean? Like, he wasn't called evil, but he was called a racist, and he probably was. You know what I mean? So I'm wondering how you are defining then this term of demonization versus critiques that may be factual.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, excellent question. So, I mean, just as going back to Irving Goffman, stigmas can be real in the sense of having a particular factual ground in reality, right? But he basically sees stigma as something about an individual that creates an expectation that this individual is unable to or unwilling to meet in society, right? So, and that makes this person a discounted one. Now, it might be true that this person actually has a deficiency or not, and this person, actually this guy to the left, was actually convicted. I mean, we actually have he was writing for an anti-Semite newspaper, right? I mean, well, yes and no. So no, but so I just want to abstract from the idea that it might be justified, whether it's justified or not. You can say about Hendrik Adams all kinds of things, and you can criticize him for all kinds of things, right? And you can praise him for all kinds of things. One of the things that to me and to many others is really key is that he was a pro-Nazi and an anti-Semite, right? And that he was convicted for it. But that's only one particular part. So if no one calls it out, is he demonized? No. If someone calls it out, he is demonized. Is that true? Or is that correct? Well, it finds its ground in evidence from 22 years ago. So in that sense, absolutely. But does it matter in the sense of does it take away from the stigma, as Irving Goffman would say? No, it might have other effects, and that's what we're interested in. It might also have different other causes, right? Because to falsely accuse someone of such a thing might actually have different causes and different effects as well, actually, than if it's really factual. But that's what we would be interested in. So in that sense, yeah, I mean, it is actually more, I see it more as a conceptual, but also an empirical question, whether it actually matters to what extent this portrayal as absolute evil is actually true.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Any other question? So I have one last question, and it's related a little bit to what Camila was asking. As I was listening to your presentation, I couldn't help but think about all the research that it's out there on the concept of hate speech, right?
Yeah.
And hate speech brings in the media aspect of your work, of this work, more to the table, because hate speech is actually something that particularly technology platforms, but also those who do research on incivility and news comment section and everything have been playing for a number of years, right? And I wonder whether the research on the effects of hate speech on voters in terms of depressing them or engaging them just because they feel empowered to the degree that they engage into hate speech against targeted groups, as depressing as it sounds, but it seems to have, there's some research showing that those who are more active are more likely to fall for hate speech against the opposition, whatever they perceive the opposition as to others. Whether you can translate the research on hate speech to demonization, or you would think that it's better to keep them separate as different literatures or different concepts, or maybe hate speech is the form that demonization takes place when you are analyzing the content, but demonization is more than just the hate speech part, is something else. I'm just trying to get my head around the fact that when you introduce a new concept, you're all the time comparing to existing concepts, right? And you did that nicely with the stigma. I was thinking with hate speech.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Sebastian. Hate speech. So I've done some work on hate speech trials, right? So of And in that context, hate speech has a very particular meaning, right? So it's really like incitement to racial discrimination. So in that sense, yeah, I can see how it is close to how demonization might be close to incitement, right? I can see how, yeah, the hate speech against particular groups in society might actually, ethnic groups, for example, like demonization in that sense. I'm not sure to what extent the whole idea of casting individual or groups as absolute evil actually is really core to hate speech here, unless you really go into like Nazi propaganda against particular groups, for example. So I'm not sure how that.
I'm thinking, for example,
Yeah.
What if a politician demonizes an ethnic group, a minority?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Demonization would be the category that you would use to describe that, or would it be hate speech, or it doesn't really matter? Are you getting at the same phenomenon or not? Or I can see that hate speech on the one hand is more specific, that it must be abusive language or toxic language, however you're going to call it, against a particular group of people defined by its characteristics, either racial or gender or immigrant status or whatever. Demonization can be broader.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm just, it's like.
Yeah, it can be broader, but it can also be more. But it's also more specific, right? I mean, hate speech can take many forms, but
Demonization only one form.
Yeah, I mean, equating something to, for example, Nazis or something that is really despicable is not always part of hate speech, I would say. So in that sense, yeah, they're quite alike, I would say, and there is overlap, absolutely. But I also see on both sides stigmatization or demonization being more specific, and also hate speech being more specific in the sense that this is really speech against particular groups that are also defined always, as far as I know, in terms of their ethnicity or social origin or sexual orientation, something that they cannot possibly change, right? Whereas demonization can take all kinds of forms, and actually it can be actually more powerful if it is demonization in terms of their ideology, for example, as that Goffman also talks about, because that is actually the own deeds of the actor. So that would be also a difference with hate speech, I would say.
Thanks. Well, I think we're right on time, so thank you very much for the presentation. Muchas gracias a todos por venir. Muchas gracias también a quienes se conectaron por YouTube. Y nos veremos en un próximo coloquio doctoral. Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So now you can have lunch.
Did I hear it? Yeah. Okay.
Un regalito para
Nice.
los presentadores de coloquio.
Oh.